must understand that the empath's heart, though soft and sensitive, is not an endless well of surrender. There is a point at which the soul that has absorbed too many wounds turns inward and finds the fire hidden in its own depths. I have seen this transformation many times, both in the individuals who came to me with trembling voices and in the archetypal currents that run beneath all of us. The empath, in their most wounded state, becomes a mirror that not only reflects the darkness of others, but also begins to integrate that darkness. And when this happens consciously, when the empath awakens to the reality that they have been the silent container for every unspoken cruelty, they cease to be the gentle lamb and awaken as something far more formidable, a being who has made contact with the shadow. The shadow, as I've often said, is not merely the repository of all that is negative or shameful within us. It is the unclaimed portion of the psyche, the raw potential, the energy that we repress because it does not fit the image we present to the world. For an empath, the shadow often appears not as their own aggression or selfishness, but as a silent accumulation of the pain and manipulation of others. The empath learns early, often in childhood, that their value lies in absorbing and harmonizing the chaos around them. They become masters of anticipation, reading the unspoken needs of those who would use their sensitivity as a weapon. But in this very process, they exile their own assertiveness, their own rightful anger, their own claim to existence. This exiled force becomes the empath's shadow, buried, and yet swelling with unexpressed life. It is a grave mistake for the narcissist to assume that the empath's gentleness is weakness. Weakness is the absence of awareness. But the empath's sensitivity is not a void, it is a radar tuned to the hidden vibrations of the soul. When the empath reaches the threshold of endurance, when the endless taking and giving finally burns them down to their essence, they awaken with a clarity that is sharper than a blade. They see through the narcissist's masks the games of power and charm, the endless hunger for validation. They see not just the person, but the archetype of the predator, the vampire who feeds on life itself. And in that moment of vision, something extraordinary happens. The empath stops trying to heal the unhealable and begins to reclaim their own light. This reclamation is a form of alchemy. Imagine a vessel that has been filled with poison for years, whispers of guilt, demands for perfection, emotional manipulation, all the subtle ways the narcissist feeds. The empath has drunk it all, thinking that to love is to endure, that to forgive is to forget. But true love does not destroy the self. And true forgiveness does not mean remaining a victim. In the crucible of suffering, the empath begins to transform the poison into wisdom. They see that the narcissist's cruelty is not personal. It is the manifestation of a fractured soul that cannot bear its own emptiness. The empath, once fed up, does not merely react with anger. Instead, they access a power that comes from seeing reality as it is, stripped of illusions. This is why a fed-up empath is more dangerous than the narcissist ever imagined. They are no longer playing the game of ego. They are standing in the raw truth of being. The narcissist thrives on control and confusion. Their entire strategy is built upon the projection of their own shadow onto the empath. They accuse the empath of weakness, of oversensitivity, of irrationality, because they cannot bear to see these qualities within themselves. And for a time, the empath believes them. They doubt their own perceptions, their own sanity. But when the empath begins to see that these accusations are merely reflections of the narcissist's inner war, they step out of the battlefield altogether. They do not need to fight with swords, for their power lies in their refusal to be defined by another's narrative. In dreams, this transformation often appears as an encounter with a wild animal or a dark figure. The empath, who has always run from conflict, suddenly stands still. They no longer flee from the beast, but look into its eyes. This is the moment of integration. The beast, which represents the shadow, repressed anger, strength, and self-respect, recognizes the empath as its rightful master. The once frightened individual merges with the energy they once feared. They become both the healer and the warrior, capable of compassion, but also of boundaries that are as firm as iron. I tell you this because the world is full of empaths who have not yet awakened. They are like uncut diamonds. Their brilliance, hidden beneath layers of fear and self-denial. But the moment an empath says, enough, a profound shift occurs. They stop absorbing every wound like a sponge and begin to radiate their own truth. This radiance is not soft and comforting. It is fierce and illuminating. It burns away lies. It exposes manipulation. It forces those around them to confront their own shadows, which is precisely why the narcissist fears the awakened empath more than anything else. The danger of the fed-up empath is not that they become cruel or vengeful. No, their danger lies in their clarity. They are no longer entangled in the narcissist's web of confusion. And this makes them unpredictable. The narcissist cannot control someone who sees them fully, who no longer reacts to their provocations, who no longer believes the story that you must fix me or I will break you. The empath realizes that this is not love but bondage. And once they cut the cords, the narcissist is left with their own emptiness, forced to face the shadow they have always avoided. The empath's journey is, in essence, a heroic one. It is the path of individuation, the process I have described as the integration of the conscious and unconscious, the light and the dark, to become whole. One must face not only their wounds, but also their capacity for power. Power is not evil when it is rooted in authenticity. The true danger lies in power that is unconscious. Power that manipulates and deceives. The empaths, when they reclaim their shadow, does not become like the narcissist. They do not seek to dominate or control. Instead, they become sovereign within themselves. They are no longer a pawn on someone else's chessboard. This sovereignty is deeply spiritual. It is as if the empath, after years of wandering in the labyrinths of other people's emotions, finds the center of their own being. Here, they encounter the archetype of the self, the unifying principle of the psyche. The self is both terrifying and liberating because it demands total honesty. It shows you the masks you have worn, the lies you have told yourself, the ways you have betrayed your own soul for the sake of peace. But once you face this inner truth, you cannot be deceived again. The empath who meets their own self becomes untouchable, not because they are invincible, but because they are authentic. There is no power greater than authenticity. Let me speak of the dreams that guide such souls. I have seen countless dreams where the dreamer is trapped in a house filled with mirrors, unable to find the exit. This is the state of the unawakened empath. They are lost in the reflections of others, unable to distinguish their own face. But then one mirror shatters. The dreamer steps through the broken glass into a garden, wild and untamed. This garden is the realm of the shadow, the place where all that was repressed lives in its raw, unrefined form. It is here that the empath must walk barefoot, unprotected, meeting the parts of themselves they were taught to despise. And when they do, the mirrors lose their power. The narcissist, who once used reflection as a weapon, can no longer confuse them. I know that these ideas may sound mystical, but they are grounded in the deepest realities of the psyche. Every relationship we have is an alchemical vessel, a container for transformation. The empath and the narcissist are not enemies by accident. They are drawn to each other because they represent opposing forces that, when brought together, have the potential for great growth. The empaths must learn to stop giving their power away, while the narcissist, if they are ever to awaken, must learn to stop taking. This dance is as old as time, a reflection of the light and dark forces within us all. The fed-up empaths is a storm that no one sees coming, because they have spent their life being the quiet river, the one who flows around obstacles, who bends but never breaks. Yet, when they awaken, their stillness turns into a force of nature. This transformation is not sudden. It is born of countless silent moments where they have swallowed their words, hidden their tears, and held the world on their shoulders. They have endured so long that when the shift happens, it is not a rebellion but a revelation. The empath sees the intricate web of manipulation, not as a personal attack, but as an archetypal drama, a dance of masks, shadows, and unhealed wounds. And in recognizing this, they step beyond the reach of the narcissist's games. Consider this: the narcissist thrives because most people live in fear of their own darkness. They fear confrontation, they fear rejection, they fear being seen as cruel or unkind. The empath, in particular, has built an entire identity around being the opposite of what the narcissist represents. They see themselves as kind, nurturing, selfless. But herein lies the trap. When you over-identify with one side of the coin, you unconsciously invite its opposite to dominate you. The narcissist represents the empath's unclaimed fire, their own capacity for saying no, for standing in the uncomfortable truth. This is why the narcissist and empaths are drawn to each other like magnets. They are mirrors of what the other refuses to face. But when the empath finally looks within and finds that they too have a shadow, when they allow themselves to feel anger without shame, to speak truth without fear of rejection, they stop being the victim. They see that they are not just a vessel of compassion, they are a force of balance. Compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. True compassion is fierce. It protects what is sacred, while also recognizing that not every broken soul can be saved. The empath learns this in the most painful way, through betrayal, through exhaustion, through the slow realization that pouring yourself out for those who only take is not love, but a form of self-abandonment. The moment the empath stops abandoning themselves is the moment the dynamic shifts. The narcissist, who once had power because they could trigger guilt or fear, suddenly finds their weapons useless. The empath no longer reacts. They do not explain or justify, they simply stand firm. This quiet strength terrifies the narcissist more than any outburst could, because the narcissist's power relies on chaos and emotional entanglement. When faced with someone who has stepped out of that cycle, they are forced to confront their own emptiness. And for someone who has spent their life avoiding that void, this is unbearable. In my work, I have often spoken of individuation, the process by which a person becomes whole by integrating all aspects of themselves. The empath's journey toward individuation is particularly profound because they have been conditioned to live almost entirely for others. They mistake selflessness for virtue, never realizing that a life without selfhood is no life at all. The fed-up empath begins the work of individuation when they finally turn their gaze inward. They ask questions they have long avoided. Who am I when I am not caring for someone else? What do I truly want? Where does my pain end and someone else's begin? These questions are not easy to answer. The empath must untangle years of conditioning, family patterns, and unconscious agreements. Often this awakening comes after a series of dreams or inner symbols appear. I have seen empaths dream of drowning in water. This represents being submerged in the emotions of others. But in later dreams, they rise from the water, gasping for air, finally breathing for themselves. Such imagery is not accidental. The unconscious speaks in symbols guiding the soul toward freedom. Freedom, for the empath, does not mean isolation or hardening the heart. It means learning to love without losing oneself. It means understanding that boundaries are not walls but gates. They allow love to flow while keeping harm at bay. When an empath reaches this understanding, they no longer feel the need to please everyone. They realize that their worth is not measured by how much they sacrifice, but by how fully they embody their own truth. And here lies the deeper danger to the narcissist. The fed-up empath does not merely walk away, they transform. They become someone who can see through facades, who no longer falls for empty charm or manipulative pity. They carry an inner light that is not naive but tempered by shadow. This light, born of suffering and reflection, has the power to expose the illusions that narcissists depend on. The narcissist is like a creature of the night. They thrive in the dark corners where no one dares to shine a light. But the awakened empath carries the torch of awareness, and this light is relentless. The shadow theory I have articulated is central here. Both the empath and the narcissist are entangled in shadow projections. The narcissist projects their weakness and emptiness onto others, demanding constant validation. The empath projects their strength and power onto others, believing they must serve or heal them. When the empath awakens, they reclaim this projection. They say, I have power, I have choice, I have the right to exist without being drained. In doing so, they not only liberate themselves, but also challenge the narcissist to face what they have always denied. Of course, not every narcissist will change. Most will retreat, seek new sources of validation, or attempt to regain control through manipulation. But the empath, once awakened, cannot be unawakened. They may feel fear, but they no longer bow to it. They understand that fear is simply the shadow's way of testing their resolve, and every time they choose to stand in truth, the shadow integrates a little more, becoming not an enemy, but an ally. Let us speak of the archetypes at play. The empath is often aligned with the archetype of the caregiver or the healer, while the narcissist embodies aspects of the ruler or the trickster. These archetypes are not inherently good or bad. They are patterns of energy that can manifest in healthy or distorted ways. The caregiver, when unconscious, becomes a martyr, sacrificing their well-being for unworthy causes. The ruler, when unconscious, becomes a tyrant, seeking control at any cost. But when both archetypes are integrated, something powerful emerges. The empath becomes the warrior healer, capable of both tenderness and strength, while the narcissist, if they ever awaken, can become a true leader who guides rather than exploits. The path of the fed-up empath is therefore not only personal, but collective. When one empath awakens, they ripple out a message to others. You do not have to suffer endlessly. You do not have to carry what is not yours. This is not a message of anger, but of liberation. It is the soul's way of saying, I have learned the lesson of endurance, and now I choose to live. And this choice, my friend, is revolutionary. You may wonder how one makes this shift, how one transforms pain into power. It is not done through mere willpower, but through deep inner work. The empaths must face their own inner critic, the voice that says, you are selfish if you walk away. They must confront the childhood wounds that taught them that love is earned through sacrifice. And they must sit with their own shadow, the parts of themselves they have labeled as bad or wrong. This is the work of the soul, the slow but steady path of turning inward until the gold hidden in the darkness begins to shine. I have often described this process as a descent. In mythology, the hero or heroine must descend into the underworld to find the treasure. For the empath, the underworld is the world of their own unacknowledged emotions, anger, grief, frustration, even hatred. These feelings are not signs of failure. They are messages from the psyche, saying, you have been silenced too long. When the empath listens, when they allow themselves to feel without judgment, something miraculous happens. The emotions that once threatened to drown them become a source of energy. This energy, when integrated, becomes the power to create, to protect, to speak with authority. The narcissist senses this shift even before the empath fully understands it. They sense the subtle withdrawal of energy, the way the empath no longer bends to every demand. This creates panic in the narcissist because they are losing their primary source of validation. They may become more aggressive, more manipulative in a desperate attempt to regain control. But the empath, now anchored in self-awareness, sees these tactics for what they are, projections of fear and emptiness. They do not take the bait, they remain still, like a mountain that no storm can shake. It is this stillness that is most dangerous to the narcissist. When the empath is no longer reactive, the narcissist is forced to face themselves. And for a person who has spent their life avoiding the mirror of the soul, this is the greatest threat. The empath does not need to attack or expose them. Their mere presence, their refusal to engage in the old patterns is enough to unravel the narcissist's illusion of power. There is something sacred in the silence of the fed-up empath. It is not the silence of submission, but the silence of one who has discovered the weight of their own soul. They no longer speak just to be understood or to justify their feelings to someone who is incapable of listening. Instead, they speak when it is necessary, and their words carry the resonance of truth. This is the language of the self, the core of the psyche that transcends all masks and pretenses. When an empath touches this center, they cease to be merely sensitive. They become a vessel of clarity. And clarity is a force that can dismantle even the most elaborate illusions. The narcissist, by contrast, lives in a hall of mirrors. Everything they show to the world is a reflection, a performance designed to hide the deep void within. But the empath, when awakened, does not mirror this game. They do not reflect falsehoods back. And this absence of reaction feels like a collapse to the narcissist. It is as if the stage on which they have been performing for years suddenly crumbles, and the spotlight goes out. The empath's withdrawal of energy is not simply rejection, it is revelation. It says, I see you, not the mask you wear. I see the wound behind the cruelty, the emptiness behind the arrogance. For a narcissist, this is unbearable, for their entire existence is built on denying that wound. The empath who reaches this state of inner vision becomes like the archetype of the seer. They no longer engage in the petty battles of ego, but they are not passive either. They stand in a kind of spiritual authority, one that cannot be manipulated, because it is rooted in the truth of their own being. They know their boundaries not as walls, but as living extensions of their soul. These boundaries are not harsh or defensive. They are natural, like the shorelines that shape the ocean. The empath says, this is where I end and you begin. And in that simple declaration, they reclaim a power that had been lost for years. But let me tell you, this awakening does not come without cost. It requires the empath to confront their own illusions, the ways they have deceived themselves. Many empaths cling to the idea that love means endless giving, that to refuse is to fail. This is an archetype too, the martyr, the one who suffers for the sake of others. While there is beauty in sacrifice, there is also danger, for when sacrifice becomes a way of life, it robs the soul of its vitality. The fed-up empath learns this lesson through fire. They are burned by their own exhaustion until they realize that they cannot heal the world, by destroying themselves. They must first heal the wound within. The wound of the empaths often originates in childhood. Perhaps they were raised in a home where love was conditional, where they learned that their worth depended on keeping the peace or meeting the needs of others. In such environments, the child becomes hyper-aware of emotional cues, reading every shift in tone, every subtle expression. This ability, while adaptive in youth, becomes a burden in adulthood. The empath is trained to seek harmony at all costs, even if it means losing themselves, and so they attract those who thrive on taking, those who sense that this soul will give and give until there is nothing left. But the turning point arrives when the empath begins to question this narrative. Why do I always feel empty? Why do I always attract those who hurt me? These questions are not signs of weakness, but the beginning of wisdom. They signal the awakening of the shadow, the unclaimed power that whispers, you are more than a vessel for other people's pain. You are a soul with your own fire. This fire is not destructive. Though it may feel like anger at first, it is the energy of life itself, demanding expression. When the empath learns to channel this energy, they stop being a passive observer of their own suffering and become an active creator of their own destiny. Dreams often reveal this transformation long before the conscious mind accepts it. I recall the dreams of many who came to me, dreams of being chased, cornered, or silenced. But as the inner work progressed, the dreams shifted. The chased became the one who turns to face the pursuer. The silent voice becomes a roar. The cornered self steps into an open field. These are not random images. They are the soul's way of saying, you are ready to meet your power. And what of the narcissist? They too are a wounded soul. Though their wound is masked by arrogance and control, the empath, in their early unawakened state, often feels compelled to heal this wound, to love the narcissist back into wholeness. But this is not the empath's task. Healing cannot be forced upon one who denies their need for it. The empath must learn to step back, to see that love is not about saving, but about seeing clearly. This clarity often feels like coldness to the narcissist, who interprets any boundary as rejection, but for the empath, it is the beginning of freedom. When an empath stops feeding the cycle of narcissistic drama, they create a space for something new to emerge. This space is not empty, it is fertile, like a field lying in wait for spring. In this silence, the empath begins to hear their own voice, a voice that has long been drowned out by the needs and demands of others. This voice speaks not in fear, but in certainty. It says, you are enough as you are. You do not need to prove your worth through suffering. The danger the narcissist feels from a fed-up empath is not physical, nor is it vindictive. It is existential. The narcissist senses that they can no longer control the narrative. Their tactics, gaslighting, blame shifting, emotional manipulation fall flat. The empath no longer takes the bait because they have learned to see through the illusion. They realize that the narcissist's attacks are not a reflection of their own worth, but of the narcissist's inner war. This detachment is not cold indifference. It is compassionate clarity. The empaths can even feel sorrow for the narcissist's pain, but they no longer confuse this sorrow with responsibility. It is here that the empath steps into their true archetype, the alchemist. They take the leaden weight of their past, all the wounds and betrayals, and they transform it into gold. This gold is wisdom, resilience, and a deep understanding of human nature. The empath who has walked through the fire of narcissistic abuse emerges with a vision that is both sharp and compassionate. They see the patterns of manipulation, not just in individuals, but in the collective psyche. They recognize the archetypal dance of victim and predator, giver and taker. And they refuse to play the same role again. This refusal is powerful. It does not need to shout. It does not need revenge. It simply says, I choose differently now. And this choice radiates outward, affecting everyone the empath touches. They become an example of what it means to love without losing oneself, to forgive without forgetting, to be open without being consumed. This is why the fed-up empath is so dangerous to the narcissist. They represent a possibility. The narcissist cannot bear to face the possibility of true freedom. The narcissist lives in a prison of their own making, but the empath, once awakened, walks out of theirs. They realize that the key was always in their hands. It was not the narcissist who held power over them, but their own fear of being alone, their own belief that love must be earned. When these illusions dissolve, the empath stands in a kind of grace that no external force can shake. This grace is not fragile. It is forged in the crucible of suffering. It is the strength of someone who has faced their own darkness and emerged whole. Let me speak of wholeness. Wholeness is not the absence of wounds, but the integration of them. The empath does not need to erase their past or their sensitivity. In fact, their sensitivity becomes their greatest gift when it is balanced by self-awareness. They can feel deeply without being overwhelmed, love fully without being drained. They become both the healer and the guardian of their own energy. This balance is the essence of the individuation process, the path toward becoming fully human. The narcissist, in contrast, is split. They live in a world of extremes, grandiosity on one side, emptiness on the other. They cannot integrate their shadow because they refuse to see it. But the fed-up empath, by embracing their own shadow, becomes whole. And wholeness has a strange power. It disarms those who rely on fragmentation and confusion. The narcissist no longer knows how to interact with someone who does not play by the old rules. This is why they often retreat or lash out, for they sense that their game is over. The moment of awakening for a fed-up empath is often described as both a death and a rebirth. It is the death of who they thought they were, the endlessly giving, endlessly patient soul who believed that love meant erasing themselves for others. But from this death rises something far greater, a self that is complete, radiant, and untouchable. The empath realizes that they were never meant to be a martyr for someone else's brokenness. They were meant to embody love, yes, but a love that includes themselves, a love that does not tolerate abuse disguised as affection. This realization shakes every relationship they have ever known. The empath begins to see which connections were rooted in true mutual respect and which were built on the silent expectation that they would always give more than they received. It is often shocking to see how many relationships fall into the latter category, but rather than despair, the empath feels a strange liberation. For the first time, they are not afraid of being alone, because solitude no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like space for their own voice, their own dreams, their own life to unfold. The narcissist, however, feels this shift as abandonment, even betrayal. They cannot understand why the empath is no longer playing the same role. They may try to lure them back with promises, with guilt, with anger, but the empath no longer responds. It is as though the emotional cord that once connected them has been severed. This is not done out of hatred, but out of necessity. The empath has learned that staying in such a dynamic is not love. It is a slow erosion of the soul. Let me tell you something profound. When the empath awakens, they do not just free themselves from one narcissist. They free themselves from the entire archetype of the narcissistic dynamic. They begin to recognize it everywhere, in the workplace, in friendships, in the collective narratives of society. They see how power can disguise itself as care, how manipulation can masquerade as love, and they refuse to be part of that illusion any longer. This refusal is not aggressive, but it is absolute. It is the silent, unshakable power of a soul that knows its own value. The empath's power lies in their ability to integrate. They do not deny their pain, they transmute it. They do not deny their anger. They use it as fuel to create boundaries and to speak truth. This is what makes them far more dangerous than the narcissist ever imagined. The narcissist's power is built on illusions and control, but the empath's awakened power is built on truth and clarity. Truth does not need to manipulate. It simply is. And when truth stands firm, no deception can hold its ground. I often think of the image of a candle in the dark. A single flame can illuminate a room, but when that flame grows into a fire, it transforms everything around it. The empath's awakening is like this fire. At first, it is small and fragile, a quiet awareness that whispers, "This is not who I am meant to be." But as they feed this awareness with courage and self-respect, it grows. It consumes the old patterns of self-betrayal and replaces them with strength. The narcissist cannot touch this fire because it is not external. It burns from within. The psychological shift here is profound. The empath moves from a state of unconscious reaction to conscious choice. They no longer define themselves by how others treat them. They no longer see their worth as something to be negotiated. This does not make them arrogant. It makes them grounded. They can still love deeply, but now their love has roots. It is not a love that bends in the wind of every demand. It is a love that stands strong and steady, like a tree that knows where it belongs. When the empath embodies this strength, they become a mirror in which the narcissist sees their own emptiness. This is why the narcissist often reacts with hostility or panic. They are being confronted with the very thing they have spent their life avoiding, their own shadow. But the empath does not need to fight. Their very presence, their refusal to engage in the old patterns is enough. They have become a living embodiment of what I call the self, the archetype of wholeness that integrates both light and dark. This is the ultimate danger to any force built on fragmentation. It cannot survive in the presence of wholeness. For the empath, this is not about revenge. It is about awakening. They understand now that their journey was never about fixing the narcissist or proving their worth. It was about remembering who they are, and in this remembrance, they find a peace that no external validation can give. They become sovereign beings, able to give and receive love freely, without fear of being consumed. I tell you this not as a distant observer, but as someone who has seen these transformations time and again. The empath's path is not easy, but it is sacred. It is a journey into the depths of the psyche, into the labyrinth of archetypes and shadows, where one must face the beasts that dwell within. But those beasts, once faced, become allies. The anger that once terrified the empath becomes a force of protection. The pain that once broke them becomes the foundation of their wisdom. The shadow, once feared, becomes the source of their greatest power. The narcissist never imagines this outcome. They believe the empath will always remain soft, pliable, easy to manipulate. But they do not understand that the same sensitivity that made the empath vulnerable also makes them profoundly aware. Awareness, once turned inward, is unstoppable. It is like a river finding its true course. Nothing can dam it forever. Once the empath decides to flow in alignment with their own soul, no external force can hold them back. And so the fed-up empath becomes a force of nature, not destructive, but transformative. They do not seek to harm, but their very existence challenges every falsehood around them. They carry an energy that says, I will no longer be diminished. I will no longer be drained. I will no longer play small. This energy does not need to be spoken. It radiates from their very being. And those who cannot handle this truth, whether narcissists or others who live in denial, will either be forced to change or will simply fall away. The empath's final step in this journey is not to close their heart, but to open it fully to themselves. First, they realize that they cannot truly love others until they love themselves without conditions. This self-love is not vanity. It is alignment with the truth of existence. It says, I am here, I am worthy, I am whole. When the empath stands in this truth, they become both healer and warrior, both giver and guardian. They are no longer merely reacting to life, they are creating it. This, my friend, is why a fed-up empath is more dangerous than the narcissist ever imagined. Their danger is not in retaliation, but in evolution. They rise above the old dynamics and embody a consciousness that the narcissist cannot control. This consciousness is the antidote to all forms of manipulation because it sees through them with clear eyes. It is the consciousness of the self, the archetype of wholeness that each of us is called to awaken within. And if you are listening to these words, perhaps you are an empath who has walked through the same fire. If so, I tell you this, your journey is not in vain. Every wound, every tear, every moment of doubt has been preparing you for this awakening. Do not fear your own power. Do not fear your own shadow. For within the depths of that shadow lies the very strength you have been seeking all along. Embrace it, stand in it, and let it guide you. For the world needs the light of those who have walked through darkness and emerged whole. You are not weak for feeling deeply. You are strong for surviving what others could never bear. And now, as you rise, remember that your strength is not in fighting the darkness, but in embodying the light that cannot be extinguished. This is your gift. This is your power. This is the truth that will set you free.